Good evening, everybody out there. It's Curt and the other guy. The other guy is my friend Brent. I just didn't want to change the title of this podcast. I have a website and a YouTube channel, and I didn't want to change the title. So it's still Curt and the other guy. But we are here again together and just reintroducing what we're doing tonight. We are just two guys that we've known each other over 50 years. We'll put it that
Forever,
way.
yeah.
I think it's over 40. I like to say over 40, which is still accurate. And we just liked, we were friends up through high school, and kind of adulthood took us different directions, but we kind of reconnected in the last few years, and we found that we have a lot in common when it comes to things like religion, politics, spirituality, values. I don't think we're not like twins or anything, but I think we agree quite a lot. And so we just wanted to come on tonight and talk a little bit about the war in Ukraine, and Russia, and those kind of things. And Brent has a unique perspective on this. Brent lived in Russia for how many years, Brent?
Going on 15.
So 15 years back in the 90s, 80s and 90s?
From 92 to 2007.
Okay. So you were there when Putin became president. Okay. So you've lived under the presidency of Vladimir Putin.
He was there when he rose to power, yes.
And okay. And you were in Moscow.
Yes,
is that right?
I lived in Moscow. Yes, that's right.
Okay. Is it better to say Moscow or Moscow?
Depends on who you ask.
I don't want to offend any Russians, so.
Well, in Russian it sounds different anyway, so
yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. That's like totally off the topic, but the country Qatar, I've heard it called Qatar.
I think it's.
I don't get Qatar. I don't get Qatar when I look at it. Qatar makes sense, but anyway, I feel like it rhymes with guitar, but that's a whole other topic. But Brent was in Russia so you said 1992 to 2007. Mm-hmm. You went over there as a missionary, is that right?
Yeah. Okay. And was doing that work the whole time I was there. Yeah.
While you were there, you met what would become your wife, Alina.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, she was Russian. Yeah.
Okay. So you got a Russian bride.
I promised myself I would never marry a Russian, but 8 years into it, I did. So,
well,
never say never.
Yeah. Love is one of those things,
it hits you. Yeah.
Yeah. And you all, were you married in Russia then?
Yeah.
Our wedding was there. That before. Okay.
Yeah, our wedding was there. Yeah.
Cool. And then, of course, you have 3 children with her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we told the story the first podcast. She passed from cancer, but she had she had some time there that you kind of knew, but it was extended a little bit. And one of my friends told me it was a sad story, but he also said he could tell that you really loved her. And so, wanted to mention that
going, but it ended sooner than we wanted, but those are things out of our control, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, and that's probably something we can talk about some other time about life. Because I get people asking me questions all the time. Why does this stuff happen? I don't know. Sometimes I just don't know. Like, I have answers, but I don't know if they're good answers or not. But what I do want to mention real quick before we kind of jump into this topic, we do have, I'm seeing we got some viewers right now. So feel free to, we're just 2 guys who have an interest in history, politics. Brent is a history and social studies teacher in Illinois. I taught some history and social studies back in the day. And we're just interested in it. And we also feel like, I think something we definitely share in common is the idea that human beings are created in the image of God. And it doesn't matter if they're Ukrainian or Russian, or if they're from Zimbabwe or from Brazil or Israel or Palestine for that matter. And it doesn't matter what religion, it doesn't matter what morality, sexual orientation. None of these things matter to the fact that God created us in his image, and that after the first commandment, which is love God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength, the second greatest commandment is love your neighbor as yourself. And that's an individual command. I think we would probably both agree with that. You can't really collectively do that. It takes a group of individuals that are like-minded. But we think that's a very important way to approach life. We want to look at it from that perspective, and not, this probably won't be as spiritual and religious, but I'm sure we'll bring some of that in because it's part of who we are. But I think the way we treat other human beings, that really shows what kind of faith we have in God and how we treat our fellow man. So kind of with that, I just wanted to, like I said, we're not experts. We have varying, I think we might even have some slightly different opinions on what's going on over there, but neither of us are geopolitical experts, nor are we ambassadors or the Secretary of State or foreign ministers, anything like that. But we did want to talk about it because we see it. It's all over the news. Of course, Friday, I don't know if you saw the news today yet or not, but Friday, of course, it blew up in the Oval Office, right? The argument and, all of that kind of stuff. But today I just heard on the news, Zelensky has publicly apologized. And he needs U.S. help. I mean, that's just all there is to it on that. That's a practical matter. But Brent I've seen a few posts of his recently, and we've chatted a little bit about the situation. So Brent, you want to just kind of take off here and tell us a little bit about where your passion is with this war in Ukraine, again, having that perspective of someone who's actually lived in Russia under the presidency of Vladimir Putin.
All right. I think to start out, too, I want to say, if Jesus' commands was to love God and then love our neighbor, and of course the question was, who is our neighbor? And the story of the Good Samaritan came about. And that really reflects Jesus' other teaching that says when it comes to our enemies, we are to love them as well. And so do good to those that do evil to you and pray for those who might use you. And so I think the idea when we're talking about War and Peace, which is a Russian novel as well.
It is Tolstoy, right?
Yeah, when I said War and Peace, we're talking about issues of war and peace. Let's remember the commandment of Jesus, what it is to love even our enemies. So I'm coming at this not saying anybody's the enemy. In my mind, as I talk about it, I lived in Russia for many years. I have in-laws and I have friends who live in that country, and I love Russia a lot. But they do not like the politics that have been there ever since the rise of Putin. When Putin came to power, it was very sketchy, basically going back a bunch of years now to 1999. Yeltsin was in power and elections were coming up. And just before the elections came along, Yeltsin resigned and made Putin the president. And then the elections happened right away. People didn't really know Putin. He was a new guy on the block. Basically, he had been kind of in charge of the KGB. So if you were in the know, you were in the know. But most common people didn't really know much about him. And so he kind of snuck in the door that way without having to really campaign. He became the incumbent very quickly. And so he became president, and then he, at the end of his term, he had another man take the place, Medvedev, and Dmitry Medvedev came to be the president next, basically set up into power. And while he was president, he came up with a new role in the government, a prime minister, and made Putin the prime minister. While they were doing that, they changed the constitution so that there could be longer term limits for presidents. And then as soon as Medvedev's term was over with, Putin comes back in, and he's been in ever since. So it's a little shady. And if you're an enemy of Putin, we've had all these people that have been mysteriously died. We've just seen him do a lot of power plays with his oligarchy, and that's just been the history there of him. And so I don't trust him. I mean, he did make back in 2014, they went into the southern part of Ukraine, the Crimea. It's a peninsula that sticks out into the Black Sea that used to be part of Russia years ago. And he claimed this is really our territory, and so took it back very quickly, very easily. It wasn't a big thing, but ever since then, the relationships have been pretty rough between Russia and Ukraine. And then a few years later, then in 2022, just 3 years ago, is when they made the full-scale attack into Ukraine. Putin said this was going to be a 3-day ordeal, but it turned out it's 3 years, and we're still trying to figure out where it's going. So that's a little bit of that history there. It's when it first started, it seemed like the rest of the world was very upset at Putin and Russia. We cut off economic ties, we cut off political ties to them, a lot of it. You saw blue and yellow flags everywhere. People were like, we feel sorry for Ukraine or for Ukraine's side. And that's kind of the way it's been for 3 years. We've been providing humanitarian and military aid along with Europe as well, being very involved in that, and Europe taking in millions and millions of refugees that left. So we feel like the Western world has done a lot to try to help alleviate human suffering there, but the Ukrainian people have held their ground, and they have not let it be a 3-day thing. And so then all of a sudden, a couple of weeks ago, when Trump is starting to speak pro-Putin and pro-Russia, it definitely threw me off because I wasn't expecting that. And then to already be at a place where we're cutting off military aid and trying to make deals that are self-serving as well. The mineral rights thing is you refer to that. It sounds like Ukraine is saying, well, okay, let's give up mineral rights if that's what it takes. We'll see where this goes. Things have taken a turn again today, and so it'd be great for the war to be over with. That there'd be at least a ceasefire. Whether that's going to solve things or whether Putin will keep his word, whether land has to be returned to Ukraine or not, who's going to rebuild back Ukraine. There's a whole mess of stuff that have to be decided.
I think it's
kind of a summary of things. I think
it goes back to it's entangling, right? It's a mess. Okay. And I kind of wanted to come back to a couple things. I wanted to ask you a few other questions. So I've been jotting notes as we talk and commenting a little bit. We got a few people watching, so far no questions. But when we talk about, for just a second, the idea of loving our enemies, right? So we both, I think, believe that to be on a personal level. But we also, there's another principle, right, that says we're to treat people the way we would like to be treated. We commonly call that the golden rule. And the thing about loving others and treating people the way you want to be treated is sometimes they don't reciprocate. And it's one thing if they slap you across the cheek, you can turn the other cheek. I think that's what Jesus commanded us to do. I don't read anywhere where Jesus commanded us to allow ourselves to be killed, or to allow our families to be killed, or to allow our neighbors to be killed. Now, this word neighbor, it could be broadened out to include every human being in the entire world.
Yeah, I say that it means anybody that crosses your path, because that's
it. That to me is a more practical definition.
Anybody that crosses your path is your neighbor. Yes. Necessarily people live next to you, but
on a national level, though, we should try to influence the foreign policy and the policy of our government to be as I think one of the buzz phrases in evangelicalism is human flourishing. And that's a good phrase. I think we should be trying to help other humans flourish. And I think another principle we kind of miss sometimes is, for me to help you does not necessarily mean that I just need to give you stuff. We can work together and trade back and forth and both benefit. I like the word symbiosis. It needs to be a symbiotic relationship. And so when Jesus says love your enemies, he's also the same person that says sometimes you have to take up the sword. He even told his apostles to not sell their swords right before he was arrested. Okay. So he's not saying that there's never a time to fight, but we should strive to be peacemakers. But what we have in this situation, I think you really summarized it well. I think we have to keep in mind that Putin, first of all, he's former KGB. Now I'm going to say something that's going to make a lot of Americans angry. Okay. But I do that sometimes. That's like saying he's former CIA. And I don't trust either one of them. That's just me. Like, I don't trust our own CIA. Okay. But secret police, spy, killed people, killed political opponents. And I think if I understood the way you said it, Yeltsin basically appointed him president. Is that correct?
Exactly.
He was not elected president.
Not at first. Yeah.
Okay. So let me stop for just 1 second before we kind of come back to this. We got a couple comments that I just wanted to mention real quickly. One person said, I don't believe Russian citizens want war, but I don't think they have a choice. And I would say it's probably true. I would say it's probably true of the Ukrainian citizens. It's true of the American citizens by a vast majority. And would you agree with that, Brent, that they don't want it, but they probably don't have much of a choice?
Yeah, I mean,
there's probably an element that
I don't think anybody really wants it on the ground. You know, it becomes a problem of political ideologies fighting against each other. So that involves people as well. So, yeah, I mean, I think that if there was a way to have a ceasefire and make everybody happy, that's what everybody would want, but not everybody's gonna be happy.
No, and I think, and I want to come to Andy has a comment here I want to bring up in just a second, but I think that what we have to realize is where we are today, nobody's going to like the outcome. Okay. Except, I mean, Russia might like part of the outcome.
I say Russia is going to come out the best.
But ultimately, they're not going to give up some of that territory. You and I were talking about this a little bit before we came on. And if you look at a map, I don't remember the 4 regions, but I know Donbass, one of them begins with an L. And then there's another small region, and then Crimea. Well, they're all contiguous. They all run down from Russia down to Crimea. Crimea is the jewel. That's what Russia wants for sure. And they will, in my opinion, never give it up because it's their only warm water port. People have probably heard that mentioned, but I think things kind of go over the top of heads sometimes. What they're saying is all of Russia's other ports are in the north and they freeze over in the winter. Well, then that means you can't get your Navy out. You can't get trade out. You can't make food deals. You can't protect your interests. And we do have to stop to think, even though Russia is an adversary, I don't know that I would call them an enemy. I don't know that I would. They are an adversary. They're not a friendly nation to the U.S. or Western Europe. NATO, but they are a nation that has their own interests and a proud, powerful nation of many centuries. I was thinking about this today, talking with a friend. I cannot think, and I don't know all of history, okay, but I cannot think of a time when someone invaded Russia successfully. I can't think of one.
Yeah, I know the Mongols.
That you're right.
The Mongols.
But that was in the 1200s, 1100s.
That was a long time, several centuries.
And probably before Russia was
modern days.
Yeah, very
modern days.
Right.
I mean, Napoleon and Hitler
could not do it.
They all got right up to the outskirts of Moscow, and then they ran out of steam. So
I think to quote the Princess Bride and to distort geography slightly, never get involved in a land war in Asia. Russia has land in Asia, so I think we can use the quote.
Yeah.
But my point being, we have to. I don't think it's wrong to treat that nation and that leader with respect, because you don't have to like him. I think you eloquently laid out that Putin is a bad guy. He's one of the worst actors on the world stage. I would never defend Vladimir Putin. Okay. My thinking is, what is the right thing to do where we are right now? And what is in the best interest of the United States, the citizens of the United States of America? Because that's where we live. Like, that's the country we're in. And so let's address Andy's question real quick here. He said, despite what Russia looked like during the Dark Ages, isn't whether or not Ukraine belongs to Russia up to the people in Ukraine? And I would say, in general, yes. The answer is yes. I think we believe that people deserve self-rule and autonomy. If they don't want to be a part of Russia, they don't. I think where it gets murky is there are ethnic Russians in Ukraine.
Right.
And
Yeah,
they may feel
Soviet
a tie
Union.
to the
Yeah,
motherland, so to speak,
yeah.
right?
During the Soviet Union, I mean, there were 15 different individual republics that all came
Yes.
together to say we're going to have this kind of like confederacy sort of
Right.
thing. And so the culture, the language, the people all got intermixed. Agriculture and power and
Mhm.
energy minerals from Ukraine were feeding the rest of Russia and the rest of the Soviet Union. So, when they all broke up again in 91, then Russia lost a lot of resources that Ukraine had. And Ukraine has done an excellent job in the last 30 years of becoming a very self-sustaining country.
Mhm.
Not that they've not had their problems and they've not had political issues, but they have everything they need to be able to be a successful nation, and support themselves. And so they've done very, very well. In fact, is probably just so well that probably Russia was a little bit jealous, and of course they've just destroyed all the infrastructure that's there. So it's kind of like, what do you win by gaining Ukraine because you've just destroyed it all? But that was, I guess, maybe the cost of it. But
Yeah, and I wonder if, from the Russian point of view and Putin's point of view, collateral damage. We don't care. We get what we want. And, so I don't know that, I don't know. I'm not sure that Vladimir Putin has a conscience. he might, I think
yeah,
he might be a sociopath or psychopath.
yeah,
But one other quick comment here. One of our friends asked, is the U.S. the police force of the world, or should we be? And I think you and I would probably agree that the answer should be no. But we also have to realize there's a situation that's already on the ground, already happening right now. So,
well,
so let's.
The United States, excuse me, has the history of we're trying to we're trying to secure more democracy around the world. And
Mhm,
so, not that, I mean, it's a little bit self-serving, because
mhm,
if these other countries have democracy and capitalism and we can do trade and have peace, then that suits us better too.
mhm.
Which isn't necessarily selfish, it's just self-serving to have that
Yeah,
role
yeah,
of being
yeah.
the
You can
face of the
benefit
world.
without being selfish, right?
But then too, how much are we buying, peace and democracy around the world by giving all the aid and the setting up our bases? And I mean, there's definitely a lot that we win through it.
Yeah.
Um, that could be selfish, but I think we're just very self-serving, and we've always been at the position to be able to do that. But we have to question ourselves: can we still do that and sustain ourselves as well? And that's, I think, what a lot of the Trump side is saying. Let's
Mhm.
not Can't do foreign aid. We can't do all this stuff. We need
Right.
to think about making America great again because we've lost that. And I get that argument, but at the same time, we have resources to help others that I believe we should help, to the extent that we can, because we are the richest country in the world, basically, and I think there's a blessing in giving, and even if we could just give a percentage, I mean, call it the biblical tithe, whatever, but if there's something we could do to bless other people, I think that would come back to us in a very positive way.
So I don't disagree with you on that. Let me kind of pull something in here for a minute. I think one of the things I noticed as I got older and started studying American history, and then started looking into where we have, I'm going to put this in air quotes, exported democracy. I don't think the track record's been very solid. So let me give an example. Let me go back into history. When we became a nation, shortly after that, the theory of manifest destiny was espoused. Okay. In other words, from Atlantic to Pacific, all of the Americas. And, this is where this issue gets really murky, muddy, complicated. Morals get tested. And what we're going to do a little bit is have a bit of a theoretical conversation, because you still have to look at the practicalities, right? But does anybody really have a right to any particular territory? Like, the only nations that have territory are nations that have taken it and held on to it. It becomes a matter of, hey, you know what? The U.S. government and its power was able to overcome the Native Americans. Fact. The U.S. government and its power was able to overcome Mexico. I watched a little video earlier today about the history of Mormonism, of all things, but which is a fascinating thing. But it was talking about the original state of Deseret, which is what Utah eventually became. It was massive, the proposed land, but all of the land that they ended up having belonged to the country of Mexico at the time. And now all of that today is the Western United States. So yes, at one time, Ukraine, I think, was even independent back in the 1500s, if I remember my history. But then it got absorbed. And then in the 90s, was that when it became
it went back
regained
to
its independence?
Yeah, it was his own thing before the Soviet Union.
Yes.
And then after it got part of the Soviet Union, then when 91, they all split up back in their own thing again.
Yeah.
Actually, the word actually, Ukraine, is actually a word that means like on the border,
Is that right?
they were on the border, right?
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it actually means on the border. In Russian, it would be the word Ukraina. I don't know what they call it. Maybe they call it the same thing, but it'd be Ukraina. And U means like on the, and Krai is the border. So, I mean, I'm fluent in Russian, so I know that much.
Yeah.
I understand some Ukrainian. When I hear them talking,
It's similar, right? It's a Slavic.
Yeah, they're related. It's like Spanish and French, but yeah, I mean, think about when, it really took off in the early 1900s when, like under Teddy Roosevelt, when we started expanding into the South Pacific and the Philippines and going down to Cuba and the Caribbean. And we started, looking for, places for bases and places for finding the natural resources that we needed.
Yeah.
I mean, so it really took off, when Teddy Roosevelt, and we're thinking about imperialism and how we're going to export. We were doing so good as a country. Let's export what we have to the world, and then we can take what we want from the world in return. We'll give them democracy and protect them, but then they'll give us exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Let my dog out.
Imperialism and colonialism kind of go hand in hand. And although America, I mean, I don't know that we don't have the same exact history of colonialism as the Europeans do. We were just, I think, better at making it look like the native peoples wanted us to come in.
Yeah.
We were able, like, you can look at, you mentioned Teddy Roosevelt, and there's a lot of things to admire about Teddy Roosevelt, but the war in Cuba was probably started under the Spanish American War was probably started under false pretenses. The Panama Canal, we fomented a rebellion in that area against Colombia so that we could then make a treaty with the new
Oh, yeah.
nation of Panama.
No, it was a very much a give and take type
Yeah,
of thing.
we overthrew the
So,
elected leader in Iran, and it
oh,
imposed
yeah.
the Shah. Like, so I think what we have to sometimes we have to stop to think we're not always the good guys. Okay. We've done a lot of good. I'm not trying to disparage this country. I love this country, but we have to keep things in perspective. And I think when you start looking at war, let me mention something about, let's kind of bring it back to Russia, Ukraine for a minute. One of my least favorite politicians, and I don't generally mention a lot of names, but when they say stuff that's just evil, I'm going to call them out. Lindsey Graham happens to be one of my least favorite politicians on the planet. And I heard him a year or two ago talking about why we needed to support Ukraine. He never brought up democracy. He never brought up autonomy of an independent nation. He never brought up freedom. He never brought up any of those kind of things. He said, as long as we are degrading Russian military and killing Russians, it's a good thing for us to support that war.
Okay.
Okay. Now, when you put that as the perspective, and Lindsey Graham is an establishment politician, he kind of kowtows to Donald Trump. Okay, but he's been up there a long time, and he knows how to play both sides, both parties, and the elite. And I think that we have to stop to think, like, just because Russia is not good, which we agree, just because Putin is evil, which we agree, just because Putin is an adversary, which we agree, does not necessarily mean we need to support a war against him. No, there may be other reasons to support, and I think good people can have disagreements, right, and that's fine.
Well, yeah, but war is not, if that'd be a last result of solving whatever the
exactly.
Is.
And I think when you look at this whole situation, right, ultimately, how is this thing going to shake out? Like, what's going to end up happening? Well, I don't think Russia's given up any territory. And the only way they ever would be for a NATO-led force led by the United States with American men and women on the ground fighting against that is,
and we
is
don't
that what we want?
I don't think anyone wants that.
Exactly. And we have to kind of look beyond what's going on right now and look to if we continue down a certain path. So I do think one thing, let me kind of pull one thing back. One thing I do think about President Trump, I do think one of the reasons he got elected was because he promised to end that war. Like, whether or not he delivers, right? The American people, I think, overwhelmingly do not want to be involved there. We look at it as more of a European problem and not really a U.S. problem. Yeah. And
well, he also claims that he and Putin understand each other. They can find a common language, and Putin will listen to him. Or that Putin is even scared of him. But I don't know that Putin's scared.
I don't think Putin's scared of him. Now, I will. Let me ask you a question, though, because I know this relates to, like, also Tulsi Gabbard, who is, I think, head of the NSA now, or one of the agencies. She went and met with Assad back several years ago. And I don't think it's necessarily wrong to meet with a dictator or talk to a dictator or treat them with respect. I think Ronald Reagan did say it quite well. You trust but verify, right? You're respectful, but you don't let them, like, pull the wool over your eyes, and you don't agree to anything that's going to be harmful to you or your actual allies. I mean, we do have to honor agreements at least until we formally break them, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um, so um, one of the things I look at when I look at this war, and we talked about this a little before coming on too, I don't really see a serious commitment from NATO and Western Europe to help Ukraine win that war. I see a kind of commitment. I see dribs and drabs of money being given. I see a lot of talk. I see a lot of accusations against Putin, which again, I'm gonna repeat myself because I don't want somebody to call me a Putin sympathizer or a Putin lover or something like that, just because I don't agree with the status quo
Right.
view on it. But my point is, if you really meant business back in 2012, 2013, 2014, when President Obama mentioned drawing a line in the sand and then Russia crossed it and nothing happened. Don't paint yourself into that corner if you're not going to follow through. And that really emboldened Russia, I think, because they were able to get that without really any consequences, that being Crimea. So how's it gonna end? Right?
Yeah. It's interesting. I was thinking today about how when the Cold War ended in the very end of the 80s, early 90s, like we in the West thought we won this.
Yeah.
We thought we won. I remember in the 90s reading a book by these like 3 or 4 guys that wrote it together who were like, top CIA Russia experts here
Mm-hmm.
in America, and they wrote a book about what they thought was gonna happen with Russia. And I read it, and I said, "Nothing like that's gonna happen." Well, it's happened exactly like you
Right.
said. They pinpointed it. There's gonna be a
Really.
dictator that comes up that's gonna start closing down democracy. They're going to attack and to try to regain a Russian empire, and I just remember, I mean, the 90s was the whole new world order. We're all gonna get along, we're all going to make things work, we're getting rid of all our enemies. We had such hope back then
Mm-hmm.
that this new world order was going to change things, right? Um, that it didn't seem possible in my mind. And I was living in Russia at the time, and I'm like, it's moving towards democracy. Things are getting better here. There's no way that it's going to go
Well,
backwards.
Yeltsin was elected, right?
Yes, he was elected. Yeah. Yeah, he was elected. Very popular at first and became very unpopular later. But the thing is, the New World Order obviously didn't last. And I
No.
think we're in the brink of a new world order that's a newer.
Well,
And
and
I
I
don't
think
think, yeah, I
go
don't
ahead.
think, can I just say, I
Sure.
don't, I hope we're not going to go to war over it. Hopefully, there's a way to figure it out so that everybody at least wins something, but we're going to have to make compromises. Nobody's
Yeah.
going to get everything they want.
Yeah.
Maybe even Russia's not going to get everything they want, but hopefully it won't go to World War III. But that's scary that it could.
Well, and I think ultimately they're gonna want to be able to save face and claim victory, right? Um,
Yeah.
and I think that Putin's pretty committed to keeping the territory that he has. He hasn't. It doesn't seem like he's really tried to take more territory since. Like there have been attacks deeper into
Yeah.
Ukraine, but I think that's more of a keep the Ukrainian military kind of still on the
Yeah.
defensive. Um, and I don't. I'd like to like in what way, what world do we see Ukraine actually defeating Russia? They may be able to hold them off,
Yeah. No, as
but
long as Russia keeps fighting, it's not
yeah.
going to go anywhere. It's just going to keep going what it's doing now for 3
And I
years.
think and I know both of us, this hurts us both, is there's over 500,000 dead people, dead human beings because of this war.
Oh, yeah.
And
Definitely.
probably it
Maybe
could
even a
have been
million
prevented
altogether. Yeah.
15 years ago, you know?
And even just the number of orphans, the number of, I mean, just, a generation of Russians that have
Yeah.
died in war. There's going to be so few young men now. I mean, I do have a friend whose son died, in the war over in Russia. I the fact that, I mean, it would be nice. I think people would be excited if it ends, even if Zelensky has to just humble pie and say, okay, Russia wins, but let's just build back what we can and let's move forward. As long as the threat isn't there that Russia's going to go back on its ceasefire or whatever it is and decide to go further, or if they get a big head and think, oh, now we can go to Georgia or Estonia or someplace
Mhm.
else and do the same thing.
Now,
That's
let
the
me ask.
fear.
It is now Estonia is a part of NATO, if I'm
Right.
correct,
Yeah. Yeah. The
and they
Baltic
do border
states
Russia,
are on, yeah, they are in NATO.
and we haven't. Russia hasn't. They might have once or twice made some. I don't think they've seriously threatened any of those nations since they joined NATO.
They make comments about
Yeah,
it. Yeah. But
kind of like
it's,
China talks about Taiwan, but then
right. It doesn't
right.
happen, but it's in their scope of what they want to
If
do.
they saw an opening and really thought they could
Yeah.
take it, yes.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. Do you, and you may not, I don't know if this is an area that you have a lot of familiarity with, but Zelensky was elected in
Yes.
Ukraine,
Yes.
but has not necessarily, Ukraine is not necessarily the most democratic nation on the planet either.
Yeah, they have their issues. They have
Yeah.
their issues as well. I agree that that is still an issue. Um, you when you go from one form of government to another,
Hmm.
it doesn't mean that all the values of that new form of government transfer over. Some of your
Right.
old values, and the old values was you made deals and you worked to get ahead in the
Hmm.
Soviet system. So, that's still part of the mindset. And I think that there is still, yeah, even though I support Zelensky in Ukraine, it's not because I think that Zelensky is the perfect leader. I
Right.
think he's done a lot of great things too, but he's part of the machine,
Yeah.
and there are definitely benefits. But I do believe he wants the war to end. The people that say that he wants to keep it going so he can profit off of it, I don't believe that.
I agree with you there
I don't
because
see that in his human nature. If he was very cold and hard, and uh, maybe, but
yeah.
he does not seem to be like that at all.
Well, and he won't have anything to be president of if he,
Right, yeah. Why
you
would
know,
you why would you want that stress
yeah.
and the threat of your life
So
and everything else? So, yeah.
one other thing I wanted to bring up with you, again, I sincerely hope that President Trump is able to broker some kind of deal that actually not just as a ceasefire, but ends the war. And let's all be honest, nobody's going to get everything they want. Russia kind of holds most of the cards in this
Yeah,
situation because they know we're probably not willing to go all out.
right.
Okay. And
Yeah,
nobody wants to risk nuclear war. I mean, let's be honest, even I don't even think Putin wants that. But
right.
here's a question. One of the things I noticed in the whole brokering of this deal that President Trump's trying to do, this mineral rights thing with the nation. And I'm going to be
Yeah,
really honest with you. I understand the concept of the US government getting back some of the money. And I think Brent may have he may have had some technical difficulty. So I'm going to stop in just about another minute. But I just wanted to mention that I do understand that the U.S. government um, would like to recoup some of our losses, but it doesn't seem like the government negotiating with another government is going to set up anything but more crony capitalism, and which is corporatism in this nation. Um, and I don't think that's going to be ultimately in the best interests of the American people. Um, I'm going to go ahead and kind of end with this. We all should work for, pray for, try to encourage peace. Just because we have maybe slightly different views on whether or not Ukraine's right or Russia's right. I think Russia was definitely aggressor. Nobody's trying to say they weren't, but ultimately, how is this thing going to end in the bloodshed, in the war, in the killing, in the destruction, and keep U.S. troops full-fledged anyway, because it's probably a pretty good chance we've had troops over there. Well, we know we've had CIA operatives and probably some special forces there since at least the early teens of the 2000s. So how can we ultimately get this done and end this war? I hope you guys enjoyed our broadcast. All of these episodes also get uploaded to Spotify. So, if you ever want to go back and maybe listen to the whole thing, just log on over to Spotify, listen to our podcast. This second one will be uploaded soon. I hope you're having a great night. Feel free to send me, through Facebook or whatever, any messages, suggestions, or topics you'd like to talk about. You all have a great night, and thanks so much for tuning in and catching Curt and the other guy. Have a good night.